Unity. So the top leader is saying we need to have unity. How come as leaders we can't have unity? And then they did the town halls, and it was proof. It was just the full proof of lack of unity. But what was learned? What has been learned by it all? That's what I want to talk about. To start with, number one, I was not there. I was not there. So I never attended a town hall. I've got a lot of friends that did attend and minister friends who endured, and that's the right word, because it took a lot out of every one of them. But since I was not there and you were, I thought I'd ask you some questions about the town halls, okay?
Okay.
Well, to start out with, what comes to your mind when you even hear the word town halls?
So I think I think we called them open forums.
Oh, is that what they were called?
In London, they were called open forums. We do, town
Okay.
hall is more of an American thing.
Okay.
So we call them open forums. I would say, I think in my mind, the first one started with Mark Templar opening things up to the staff after he'd been at Long Beach. So I wasn't at that one. That was, and the one in Long Beach might have been some kind of open forum. I think again, there were the geographical sector leaders had issues with the world sector leaders. So the first one I heard about was the staff all having issues with Mark and Nadine, like one 3 hour session and a 6 hour session, sharing about their hurts, like the way they felt threatened with like if your ministry's not growing, we're going to send you to India, all this all that kind of stuff. And then the first one that I was part of was kind of wasn't meant to be an open forum. It was Mike Fontenot preaching a lesson, ignoring all the issues that would take. Actually, that's not true. There was a leaders meeting in the East. We had a leaders retreat, which I was invited to because I was being vocal, where we started to share. And that was a great one. I have to say, that was when I still had hope that the church could change. I remember Mike D'Souza invited me to come, and Tina, I think I can't remember if we were engaged yet. My girlfriend, we went to this leaders. It was like a leaders retreat in one of those motels off the motorway, and we had a one evening. We shared, and it was quite intense. It was like I remember at one point, Mike said, "Yeah, the system was really bad" or something like that, and a brother who'd been on ministry on staff said, "Well, Mike, you really, whether it was bad, you really played it and kind of enforced it." And Mike sort of apologized. And then one brother stood up and said, "Well, I think the issue with leadership, with the staff, is pride." And that got a really strong reaction from one of the sisters on staff. She was like, "You've been in our house." Like it was like this, the beginnings of that feeling of the staff feeling hurt, but ordinary members beginning to have a voice that they'd never had before. And but everyone, I would say that meeting that evening, this is just before Christmas, um, or certainly before the new year. We kind of it was kind of encouraged. It was like, hey, we're getting stuff out, we're being real. This is good. This is good. And then there was this big meeting in the new year, which Mike Fontenot preached a lesson. It was like the same sort of lesson Doug Arthur would preach, but less well done. How to grow your Bible discussion. And there was a question and answer session afterwards. And I took the opportunity, and a few of us took the opportunity. We didn't know, but we turned it into an open forum. I guess we had a little taste of it in that leaders retreat. So we had a little taste of it.
And it
And
was a good taste.
it was a good taste. It was a good taste. I got to tell you one story in a second. Anyway, so I asked this question. My question was, why are you still leading? All this stuff that we've just discovered that's been going on, like we know about Mark now. before this, Mark had already stood up on another meeting and apologized. It wasn't an open forum, but it was completely unheard of in the ICOC. He said, I'm sorry for banning golden rule of leadership. I'm sorry for, raising up the sharp, or that might have been the dean. I'm sorry for this. I'm sorry for that. And then other leaders sort of weren't supposed to apologize, but they got caught up in the emotion. They apologized too. So, and then Mike Fontenot came to town and was just like, oh, back to business. And we were like, no, hold on. Things have changed. This isn't, we're not going back to business because we know some things now. And our voices, we want our voices to be heard. And we're not against you, but you basically, there's no reason you should be leading because a lot of us have been talking about this stuff for a long time. And so why you're not leading? You're blind. You're clearly blind. So I brought that up, and then another brother brought up, and that turned into an open forum. And then I think in the regions they started to have some open forums. I wasn't there for a lot of those in the different regions, and then it all kind of culminated in a big meeting in York Hall that all went, as they say in England, tits up, like because there was leaders still trying to retain control, and there were people like me insisting they shouldn't retain control, and so it kind of exploded. But I have to just tell you this one story because in all
What
of
was that expression? It went what up?
tits up, tits up.
What does that mean?
It
It
went,
just blew up. It blew up.
yeah, tits up is like it's all gone. Pete Tong is another one. It's like it's sort of like it all kind of exploded. It all big mess. It's all
Gotcha,
gone
gotcha.
tits up. It's all and But I have to tell you this one story. I want to get this story in. So when all this was going on, at some point I had to meet somebody like the elder. I had to meet somebody at the offices of the church offices. And I got there maybe a bit early, and they were still having their staff meeting. And this is in the middle of everything. So I can't remember what point this was, but things had kicked off already. And they were having their staff meeting. And I'd spent years waiting outside those rooms for staff meetings to finish to use my living room or to talk to somebody. And I just thought, I'm going to just go and sit in this staff meeting. So I just walked in the room and I went and sat down. And they all looked at me. It was a bit like, I don't know if in England we have staff rooms where the teachers sit. It's a bit like being a 10-year-old child and just walking into the staff room and just, hello, Mr. Rogers. Hello, Mrs. Braithwaite. Yes, I thought I'd just sit here. It
Well,
was a
I'm
bit like that.
gobsmacked. You're not supposed to be in here. You're not.
Exactly.
You're not in
And,
your proper
and
place.
honestly, out of all the things that happened at that period, for me, that was the bravest thing that I did. For me, that was the bravest thing. It was just to go and I just sat there and they all looked at me like, and then I think Adrian Hill he said, oh, well, we've sort of finished anyway. Because they knew at that point their power had gone. Like they had no, because if they said I was just waiting, if they'd said to me, you can't be here, I'd say, well, I think I pay your wages. I think I pay your wages, don't I? Why should I? Is there a secret? What's the, I don't know what I would have done. I didn't know what, I just sat down. I didn't know what to do. So that's when I think about the open forums, it was all that. It was never, and to be fair, I also think there were a lot of members, ordinary members, who didn't like the open forums. It wasn't just the leaders. There were ordinary members who found it too much. I remember somebody told me, a brother said, so this is what a leader told me. So obviously they had an agenda, but like, I don't want my midweek to be having to listen to Matthew Walpert complain about the church or something like that. So there were members. I've written this thing down.
Yeah.
Can you read that, James?
Move on.
Yeah. That's been the mantra since 2003 of the people who don't want to deal with what we were and what we became. Move on. Time to move on. We need to move on. Okay, Matthew, you've expressed your issues. Now let's move on. And I guess my issue is always move on to what? Like
And
we've
if you're
just
not happy
discovered.
with this, maybe it's time you move on,
Well,
if you know what I'm
that
saying.
I wasn't even going there. I mean,
That's what they told Sherry.
yeah, I mean that's where it ends up. But for me, it's this idea: move on. We can't move on until we deal with this. It's like I can't think of a good enough analogy, but it's like there's nothing to move on to when you realize you're the people who would.
Remember when we
Like,
did the apology lesson? I'm
yeah,
sorry that I committed adultery and slept with our next door neighbor. I apologize. Now let's move on.
yeah, it's that.
Let,
That's
let, let's
exactly it.
move on. No, no, no. We don't need to move on right now.
So That's my experience of the town halls. So I basically enjoyed them. And I just think if we just kept doing that, just kept having town halls, and the leaders have been humble. So the leaders couldn't have stayed in power. If they just put their hands up and go, yeah, we've blown it. We don't know who's in let God. Hey, do you know what? God's in control. What we because none of us are in control. Let's just meet up and let's just keep talking. Let's just keep talking. I think if they'd done that, I don't know what would have happened, but it would have definitely been the mature spiritual thing to do. But the leadership, and I do blame the leadership because I think if the leadership had done that, the church was conditioned enough to follow the leadership. Even if the leadership had said, "Look, we're stepping down, but let's just keep talking. We're not going anywhere." But a lot of them disappeared. I mean, there was a lot of anger. There was a lot of anger. So and people maybe even more angry than me, and perhaps less willing to forgive. I felt there was forgiveness. I felt like if there'd been honesty, I certainly had no issue with forgiving anybody, but I couldn't bear. What I couldn't take was, oh no, we're still the leaders. That for me was my red line. That was my no, no, you can't. You're not the leaders. You have because you've blown it, and you don't even. In fact, you're more blind than the rest of us. So I don't want to hurt you, but and in fact, the whole nature of leadership is skewed. Like the whole nature of leadership. So it was like, but obviously everyone was in different. So a couple of leaders could hear that, but and some leaders were somewhere in the middle. But there was enough kind of old guard leaders who didn't want to let go, maybe out of fear for what would happen to the church, maybe out of selfish ambition, maybe out of just they thought they were doing the right thing. But in the end, it was too much.
Fear of losing paychecks is a big one.
Well, that I can never say that without that's up to them. If they have to look in their own hearts and decide if
I can say that.
So that was a bit of a long-winded thing on open.
Well, no, I appreciate you sharing those things. I want to tell you that from leaders only, and I mean evangelists only, these were the descriptions I got from them to me. Town halls, horrible, out of control, traumatic, big mistake. Never do that again. Members screaming and yelling. That's what I heard from evangelists.
And I totally get that because it was like they were the brunt of a lot of anger. It wasn't as out of control. So compared to a normal church service, obviously I wasn't in lots of other open forums. Compared to a normal church service in the ICC, it was completely out of control. Because a normal church service in the ICC is absolutely controlled to the last detail. Whose song leads, who says this, who does that. Everyone,
even a Bible talk, you're not allowed to speak up against a leader like that.
And not only that, even in a church service, the actual people in the auditorium are controlled. It's like make sure you come looking smart, make sure you give, make sure you've got your Bible, make sure you take notes, make sure you bring a visitor, make sure you cheer the evangelist, make sure you say amen, make sure you're fired up. So the control was deep. The only people who weren't controlled were the visitors, and the visitors already felt the general vibe for the visitor would be don't step out of line. Don't start raising your hands and speaking in tongues. That would have been a subliminal vibe. So the depth of control, and like you say, in Bible discussions, there was a script, and the members were expected to follow that script and contribute to that script.
This was something different that we had never experienced in the ICOC. And I met with Albert during these, which was unusual. I mean, I didn't meet with Al that many times. I'm guessing 3 times, 4 times when I was in California. But I still remember where we ate, and he brought all these up, and I said, "My gosh! So what's your conclusion?" He said, "They will be stopped, and we probably will never do these again." And that alone shocked me. I mean, I want people to understand and maybe view it a little different. By the way, were there people that shout? I heard people in the South Zone. That was my zone. Those are my people. There were people that shouted out ugly things to Fred Scott. Okay, guess what? I don't approve. I'm serious. I don't care what you think about someone. This is no time to to make horrible comments about his cancer or any of that kind of stuff. I just that really did bug me. But I've got to say, this is what bugged me even more. We actually got together with a church that has been so totally devoted to leadership for decades, and for the first time said, we're going to do something different now. We're going to let you tell us what you think. No, we're going to listen. We're not going to rebuke you back. Don't worry. We're not going to put you on the list, a weaker struggler. We won't take you off the rolls. Listen up. We want you to tell us what could we do better. We want you to tell us, how do you really feel about being a part of this? For the first time. That's what happened. And everything that had been pent up, everything that had built up over years, when I even questioned something and was rebuked, all of a sudden you're saying, I can ask those questions, I can make those comments. That's why it came out like fire hoses. It's an indictment to the group that the first time that they're able to speak honestly and freely, they are chastised for being too negative. I don't like to use this analogy too often, but sometimes it seems to fit. If the slave master said, we're going to do something different on this Saturday night, I'm going to invite you into the master's house, and I want y'all to tell me what kind of a slave master I've been. And I want you to be honest. You're not going to get punished, not going to get beat, but I want you to be honest about what would make me a better man, a better slave master. And you're saying we're not going to be beat? No, you're not going to get beat. You can tell us the full truth. Okay, I think probably those are similar meetings. How do you expect them to be calm when they are livid about the way you handled situations with them and their family members in the past? How can you expect them to sit there to be calm and controlled? If you had already worked it out with them years ago, there would be none of that there. But it wasn't worked out. So it came out so abruptly. And that's proof that we needed more. That's all. That's proof. I've often told the story about when I got out of the ministry and went to live in Atlanta. And I was on the road a lot with my job, new job. And Tanya would take the kids out occasionally. I didn't go out as much. When I got home, I didn't want to leave home. But there was a local restaurant called Old Charlie's. And boy, my kids loved it because they had potato soup and rolls. Their rolls. I think they're still famous for them. And my wife said, today I want us to go out and have a meal at Old Charlie's. And I went, okay. She said, it'd be nice for you to go out with the family. I think the kids were 6 and 4. And what I remember about that day was, gosh, the kids were misbehaving. I was so embarrassed. They were running wild. We were in a booth. My daughter stood up and started yelling stuff to the people at the booth behind me. And they're only 2 feet. They're only 2 feet away. And one of them said they had to go to the bathroom. So I said, go. But then instead it was running around all the tables and yelling. Then the other one followed. And I sat there and I was embarrassed and I was frustrated. And never did I believe more in corporal punishment than that moment in that place. And I told Tanya, I want you to enjoy this meal because this is the last time I'm taking them out for a meal with me. You can do what you want when I'm out of town. I'm not going to put up with this. I'm not having fun. This is not relaxing for me. I said, I'm just not going to do it. It's not worth it. And she said, the issue is we haven't done this often enough. We haven't done it often enough. This is new ground for them. And I was thinking, well, we've done it one time too many. And she was saying, "No, this is new in situation. This is something totally new. They don't know how to behave in a situation like this." I'm not saying that our members were kids. I'm saying they were put in a very awkward situation that they weren't used to. We had never done that before. We had not allowed it. And I believe if we would have kept doing it, eventually there would have been some great discourse. Things would have settled down. They were stopped too soon. And here's the part that really bugs me. If you're a member that sat there and you were as disturbed as I am about the fact that the one time they tell you you can be honest and they shut it down because they don't like your honesty, why do you stay? I'm looking in the camera for this one. Why would you stay in a place? And bigger, why would you give? For anybody that says, I don't like to use the word brainwashed talking about my church, I got to use it right now. You're going to stay in an abusive relationship. Would you stay with a husband that said that? I'm not going to ask you. I tried one time to ask you what I could do better. I didn't like the way you responded. We're shutting that down. You'll never be asked that again. I'll get back to work. I'm in charge. Would you stay there? Would you want your kids in that relationship like that? What would you think about me as a father? I said, guess what? I tried finding out how I could be a better dad to my kids, but they said rude things to me, so I shut it right down. I said, you'll never get me asking that question again. What kind of father am I? And you're paying? Cognitive dissonance. You're paying to be a part of that. I know a lot of people hate their jobs. I used to work with people that hated their jobs. Believe me, a lot of people hate their job. A lot of people work Monday through Friday doing what they hate so they can have a weekend off. But you know, at least they're getting paid. What if they were going to a job they hated, but they had to pay to be there all week? For a whole lot of people, if they had not bought the line that only in this group are you saved, only in this group can you go to heaven, only in this group can you have the Holy Spirit, you wouldn't hang around in a club where they told you, do the work. We don't want to hear what we could do better. You had one chance years ago, didn't like your response. That's what's happened. I've had preachers call and say, well, how many more do you think we ought to do? And I said, do them until people stop showing up. Do it every Sunday afternoon. At 3 o'clock, we'll have our next town hall, our next open forum, open discussions all the time. It starts at 3. We usually finish it at 4. If it keeps going to 4:30, that's fine. And they're every Sunday. And all of a sudden there's 50, then 5, and then 2. And then there's old Jack that just shows up every week so he can say a few things. Show up with Jack. Go ahead and have that hour until nobody shows up. The people deserve that, in my opinion. There, I stood on a soapbox, felt like I was at Hyde Park again. But that is how I feel. And this disgusts me. It disgusts me that people would be treated this way. And they're the ones that are giving. They're the ones that are paying for the preacher that decided I've heard enough. Your thoughts?
So first of all, in my mind, I've got London very much in my mind. So it's not, I don't know what went on in New York or Chicago or
Yeah.
LA and how things were handled there. So, okay, the first thing is church, in my opinion, is an open forum or should be an
I
open.
like that comment. I like that
I mean,
comment.
the idea that, like, I mean, again, if you want this, if you need this example, Jesus's ministry was an open forum. You had people questioning him. You had people arguing. You had the disciples debating. You had the Pharisees. You had the lepers. You had the Syrophoenician woman. It's an open forum. Paul went into the temples and into the squares and had an open forum. Churches, it's hard to tell, but it looks like pretty much they were open forums. There were discussions. This thing of one preacher at the front and the rest as an audience, I don't really know where it's come from. I don't really care where it's come from.
It didn't come from Church of Christ. It was long before that.
No, clearly, look at pretty much every church apart from the Quakers, and I'm sure there's a few other examples. That's how they operate. It's a guy at the front, normally a man at the front, sometimes a woman, and the rest of the audience. Then you've got a few other people talking, and they might essentially that's what churches do. For me, churches is an open forum, as in you're talking. My voice is just as important as James's, whose voice is just as important as Angela's, whose voice is just as important as Fred's, whose voice is just as important. Like we are, there's no one more or less important. And if somebody's got more wisdom, hopefully that voice will come through. But it has no rights of its own, because it might be actually the person who everyone thinks hasn't got any wisdom actually comes up with a brilliant idea or brilliant insight, or it's like, who are we to say who's got the wisdom? Like who knows? And then you could get into all the appointed leaders, all that kind of stuff. But essentially, the idea that church is anything other than an open forum, to me, is an insult to the human race and to people. It's like,
I love that. Love that.
so
Love that insight.
that's the first thing. The second thing is going back to what happened at the time. So I'm basically agreeing with everything he's saying. Just there's a few kind of slants I want to mention, and one is gaslighting. And I'm not sure if we used that term then, but we'd all been gaslit. And to be fair, I think the leaders have been gaslit. I think we'd all been gaslit. Gaslighting in terms of, I've got all these doubts. Like, is it right that I should be asking advice about, as a 40-year-old, about whether I can date this girl? Is it right that I'm not going on holiday with my family, but instead I'm going to go to this conference, but I never get to see my family? Is it right that I'm taking out a loan to pay special contribution for my disciples, because that's what the leaders told me to do? Is it right that, so we'd all had these doubts. We'd all had these doubts. And now suddenly, 2002, 2003, we realize we're not the only ones having these doubts. And not only that, the leaders have had the same doubts. And not only that these doubts are valid. Actually, we shouldn't have been doing this. Of course, there's going to be high emotion. Oh my gosh, what do you expect? You shut people down for years and years and years. You're not even allowed to look at spiritual pornography. You're not even allowed to mention this stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, there's going to be a deluge of issues, and people wanted to speak up. But the leaders were totally ill-equipped, because the reality was the leaders were actually I'm sorry to say this, the leaders were actually some of the least spiritually mature people in the congregation, if not the most spiritually immature people in the congregation. So therefore, it was impossible for them to handle it. The only thing they could do was to put their hands up and say, we've blown it, we don't know what we're doing. And that required incredible humility that they already lacked. They already lacked the humility to be honest as leaders to go, they'd already bought into the system so heavily. It was almost impossible for them. But 20 years on, I would say it's now, you really don't have much of an excuse. You really don't. To now go, listen, we blew it. And from my point of view, that's all I was looking for from the leaders, was just to go, yeah, we don't know what we're doing. And I could have gone, I don't know what I'm doing either. None of us know what we're doing. Let's pray. Let's look at the Bible. Let's talk. But there was still a sense they didn't want to let go of their sense of righteousness. And it wasn't just the leaders, it was the members as well. There's a lot of confusion, to be fair. And it's just the way it was. So there was one other point. I think the point in London, this is what I think about in London. I don't know if the leaders shut down the open forums because the leaders didn't have the power. So in London, because it kind of started in London, the leaders they lost the power, and everyone stopped paying their contributions. So they all made redundant. And then people like me left. A lot of the kind of bigger troublemakers we left because it was like, I can speak for myself. The issues are way too deep. and we're never going to, I need to work out what I believe. This is pointless. And there's too many people
Yep.
who want to hold on to the past or want to hold on to power. But then the leaders were got rid of, and then there was a lot of flux in London. Now, this is the problem in London. I don't know if this has happened in other places, but this is definitely what happened in London. You've got members who are still around, and they try leading. So some of the ordinary members, people like me, friends of mine, they sort of tried to become the leaders. So you get the ordinary bros or sisters trying to be the leaders rather than Doug Arthur and Kit McKean and, the charismatic people and the good salesmen. And the problem is the church is built in a very particular way. The church doesn't really work with those kind of leaders
No.
because the church is a particular vehicle. And that particular vehicle works with a particular kind of engine and a particular kind of captain running the ship. So you can't just put in a different engine and a different captain. It doesn't work. So of course the ICC works because it's got Kip, or it did till recently. It's got Kip, it's got the engine, the captain, the thing.
Right.
And Doug Arthur, obviously in Boston, they wanted Doug Arthur to come back because Doug Arthur fits the mold. So even when the leaders didn't shut down the open forums, and even when the members were kind of given an opportunity to take over the reins, it's not they're not the right people to do it because the kind of people that need to lead it are Kip and Doug and yourself, in the previous, a certain type of person and a certain type of leadership. So inevitably, that's where they end up going back to, in the East, they got Mike D'Souza back in. He's left since, left leading the East. They got Mohan came back in, because inevitably it's like the people, we need a king. It's like that thing in when they was like, we want a king. And God's saying, you don't need a king. I'll be your king. And then, no, we want a king. It's a bit like that. I don't know if it's a perfect analogy.
No, I
So,
get it.
so what I'm trying to say is it goes even deeper than the leaders shutting it down. To be fair to the leaders, there is, you have to completely dig up the foundation and break the mold. And probably in order to do that, everyone needs to kind of, to a degree, go their own way and work out what they believe and work out who they are. Staying as a group, you can keep your friendships, but trying to do anything ICOC, like meet on a Wednesday and a Sunday, have a sermon and a communion. You can't, you're just going back into the same, like a dog returning to its vomit.
You
I'm
forgot
sorry.
the joke before the sermon because there's a good joke about a man that walked by a zoo and it said, "We will hire you today." Hey, thanks for your comments. Let me tell you that my favorite comment you made today, and I'd like to hear from comments and see how many people would agree with me on this. Church is an open forum. Church is a town hall. Church is a community where we have equal voices. I love that. Thank you for all your contribution on it. And thank you all for listening. Give us your thoughts. And we might even do a town hall. I've been wanting to do a live town hall. So, Matthew, see what kind of
I'd
comments we
love,
get from
James.
this.
I would love to do that.
I would love, a lot of you didn't even get a chance to really share with leadership what you wanted to. And maybe you feel differently now, but maybe it's something that you would have
Let's
shared
let's
then.
do a live streamed town hall
I just think it'd be wonderful.
on Zoom.
Yes.
We can even just do it on Zoom. Whoever comes, and then we can either broadcast or not broadcast. Maybe just do an
And they
online
can
town hall.
comment afterwards when they watch it later. They can add on their things because I
Yeah.
think that's important. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, James.